The nurses thought they'd seen it all, until the woman on the gurney started killing them without laying a finger on them. One by one, trained medical professionals collapsed, fainting, gasping for air, writhing in uncontrollable spasms. And the source of it all was their patient. This is the true story of Gloria Ramirez, the toxic lady, and the night an emergency room turned into a scene from a horror film. It was a quiet Saturday evening at Riverside General Hospital. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, the smell of antiseptic hung in the air, and the ER team was prepared for the usual night of broken bones, chest pains, and the occasional late-night chaos. Then, just after 8 p.m., the doors swung open. Paramedics rushed in a 31-year-old woman, Gloria Ramirez. She was young but gravely ill, her body weakened by late-stage cervical cancer. Her breathing was uneven, her heart racing. Nurses and doctors moved fast, working in unison to stabilize her. But then, things got strange. Her skin seemed to glisten under the lights, as though coated in oil. A faint, garlicky, fruity smell clung to the air. When blood was drawn, it carried an ammonia-like odor, and even contained tiny yellow-brown crystals no one could explain. Within minutes, one nurse collapsed, then another, then a third. The emergency room became a battlefield, not against disease, but against something invisible and deadly. By the end of the night, 23 people would be sick, 5 hospitalized, and Gloria Ramirez would be dead. What happened in that room would baffle scientists, divide experts, and go down as one of the most mysterious medical events in history.
It's one of the most bizarre medical mysteries in recent memory, and doctors still can't explain it. It happened 2 weeks ago in a Southern California emergency room. A team of medical workers collapsed, apparently after inhaling fumes coming from the body of a dying woman. One of the victims is a doctor, and tonight our doctor, Timothy Johnson, visits her in the hospital where she's still recovering to find out what happened.
The incident that hospitalized 6 medical workers, including 1 doctor, was so alarming to the staff at Riverside General Hospital that the emergency room was evacuated to the parking lot. It has not yet been determined what caused the emergency room workers to fall ill while treating a cancer patient who had been brought in by ambulance. Gloria Ramirez, the patient, had complained of breathing problems. She later died of heart failure. While the ER staff was inserting an IV tube and drawing blood, an odor of ammonia was noticed, apparently coming from the patient's blood. To add to the mystery, Dr. Humberto Ochoa, who was not affected, noticed white crystals in the blood.
I don't know what it could possibly have been.
For the autopsy, 6 days later, the coroner's office built a specially sealed room, and the staff was protected with hazardous duty suits. Afterwards, everyone was hosed down with decontaminants. So far, the autopsy has provided no answers.
Nothing ruled in, nothing ruled out. We are still dealing with an unknown at this point.
2 days ago, I interviewed the only victim who remains hospitalized, Dr. Julie Gorchinsky, who was working in the emergency room that night.
When I asked the nurse to start an IV, that about coincidentally at the same time I smelled, ammonia. To me it was ammonia. And I kind of made a comment that, that's really strong ammonia. And I kind of felt, like I was going to pass out then. So I moved around to the other side of the bed to get away from the fumes.
She then told me what she believes made her sick.
And in retrospect, which I shouldn't have done, I smelled the blood. And a few seconds later, I wasn't feeling good myself. And just remember waking up, being helped to be breathed with a mask.
Julie was often hooked up to a breathing machine because she would suddenly stop breathing. This week, she has been feeling much better.
It's great to go to sleep and be reassured that you're going to wake up without having anybody breathing for you.
However, Julie knows she's a long way from her days as a professionally ranked surfer.
Just laying in bed here, I kind of feel like a 9-year-old lady. My lungs still aren't up to par. I just brush my hair and I'm very exhausted.
As an emergency room physician, you've obviously hooked up people to all kinds of tubes, breathing tubes, IVs, etc. Now you've been on the other end of it. How did that feel?
This experience has completely changed my thinking process. When you do things emergently, sometimes, it's difficult to make the patient comfortable, but I think if I'm in that position, I'll go the 2 extra seconds or a minute to comfort the patient and make, if it is the last few moments, comfortable, because I had a lot of procedures here, and it was scary. It was scary.
Tim Johnson is in Los Angeles right now, and we, of course, certainly hope that the doctor will be restored soon to full health. But what is her condition at this moment, Tim?
She's been hospitalized at the Loma Linda Medical Center for 2 weeks. She's doing much better. I think she'll be discharged in the near future. Her doctors have studied her and said that they can't find evidence of strychnine or cyanide or organophosphates, the kind of poisons found in insecticides and pesticides, but they don't have a diagnosis. And as her doctor said yesterday, if we don't have a diagnosis, we can't make a prognosis. A lot of uncertainty about what her future is.
Really strange. Now, you're a physician who has worked in emergency rooms, and I'd like to know what you think. What is this business?
Well, in all of my years in the emergency room, I never encountered anything remotely like this, I must say. I certainly had times when I could smell things from the patient's lungs, but nothing that would knock me off my feet. And I must say that the more I've learned out here, the more questions I have. The family has raised some very legitimate questions about the victim. What really happened to her? And I think it would be a mistake to rush to judgment, the initial judgment we all had, that it was fumes from the patient's body or something in the patient's body. Yeah. It may turn out to be that when we get the final results, but a lot of unanswered questions that I think we're going to continue to follow.
Gloria Cecilia Ramirez was an ordinary woman living in Riverside, California, until her final night in February 1994 turned her into one of the most mysterious figures in modern medical history. Born on January 11, 1963, she was just 31 years old when she became the center of an incident so bizarre that newspapers would dub her the Toxic Lady. It was a name born not from sensationalism alone, but from the extraordinary events that unfolded in the emergency room that night. Events that would leave trained hospital staff fainting, gasping for breath, and even hospitalize themselves after coming into contact with her. On February 19, 1994, Ramirez was feeling unwell. She had been battling late-stage cervical cancer for some time, but this day was different. She had been vomiting and experiencing severe nausea for hours. By evening, her condition worsened, and her boyfriend, Johnny Estrada, called 911 in a panic. Paramedics arrived quickly and found her in distress, her heart racing, her breathing shallow and irregular in a Cheney-Stokes pattern. She was disoriented, unable to respond clearly to questions. The paramedics provided oxygen through a mask as they rushed her toward Riverside General Hospital. At 8:15 p.m., Gloria Ramirez was wheeled into the emergency room. Medical staff moved quickly. Respiratory therapist Maureen Welch, taking note of the patient's age, remarked how unusual it was to see such severe deterioration in someone so young, even with a cancer diagnosis. The team administered sedatives, diazepam, midazolam, and lorazepam, to calm her, then lidocaine and beryllium to stabilize her dangerously abnormal heart rhythm. But despite their efforts, Ramirez's condition spiraled downward. She began to slip into shock. As the medical team prepared to defibrillate her, an unsettling detail caught their attention. Her skin seemed to glisten under the harsh emergency room lights, as though coated in a thin layer of oil. And then came the smell, faint but distinct, a strange fruity garlic-like odor emanating from her mouth. The strangeness deepened when registered nurse Susan Kane inserted a needle into Ramirez's arm to draw blood. Almost immediately, she noticed a sharp, ammonia-like smell rising from the sample tube. Kane handed the blood vial to medical resident Julie Gorshinsky. As she examined it, Gorshinsky spotted something no one could explain. Small, yellow-brown, manila-colored crystals floating in the blood. Before she could process what she was seeing, Kane suddenly felt an intense, burning sensation on her face. Moments later, she collapsed to the floor, unconscious. Staff rushed her out of the trauma bay. Then, almost immediately afterward, Gorshinsky herself began to feel lightheaded and nauseous. She staggered out to the nurse's desk, but before she could answer when asked if she was okay, she too fainted. The third to fall was Maureen Welch. She had noted the same unusual smell in Ramirez's blood moments earlier, but now her body was seizing with muscle spasms. As she regained consciousness, she found she could not control the movement of her limbs. The situation in the ER was spiraling into chaos. The hospital declared an internal emergency and evacuated all non-critical patients into the parking lot. A skeleton crew remained behind to try to save Gloria Ramirez's life. Despite their efforts, 45 minutes of CPR, defibrillation, and every available intervention, Ramirez could not be revived. At 8:50 p.m., she was pronounced dead. The official cause at the time was kidney failure, brought on by her advanced cancer. But her death was not the end of the night's horrors. By the end of the evening, 23 people in the ER had reported symptoms ranging from fainting and nausea to muscle spasms and difficulty breathing. 5 required hospitalization, with 1 remaining in intensive care for 2 weeks. What had happened inside that room? The Riverside County Health Department quickly called in California's Department of Health and Human Services. 2 scientists, Dr. Ana Maria Osorio and Dr. Kirsten Waller, led the initial investigation. They interviewed 34 hospital staff using a standardized questionnaire. Patterns began to emerge. Those who had experienced the most severe symptoms had been within 2 feet of Ramirez and had handled her IV lines. Curiously, the majority of those affected were women. All had normal blood test results after the exposure. The investigators suggested the most likely explanation was mass sociogenic illness, essentially mass hysteria triggered by a stressful event. Not everyone agreed. Dr. Gorchinsky, for one, vehemently rejected the idea that her symptoms were psychological. She had spent 2 weeks in intensive care, suffering from breathing difficulties, hepatitis, and even a vascular necrosis in her knees. She insisted something physical had happened that night, something toxic and real. Her stance prompted the Riverside Coroner's Office to seek additional answers, turning to the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. Livermore scientists examined the details and developed a starting theory. They believed Ramirez had been using dimethyl sulfoxide, DMSO, as a home remedy for pain. DMSO, a solvent sometimes sold in gel form at hardware stores, is known to create a garlic-like taste in the mouth after use and can leave an oily residue on the skin, both symptoms observed in Ramirez. The scientists speculated that in her body, DMSO may have built up due to kidney failure. When paramedics administered oxygen, it could have been converted to dimethyl sulfone DMSO2, which crystallizes at room temperature, potentially explaining the strange crystals seen in her blood. The theory didn't stop there. The Livermore team proposed that the electrical shocks from defibrillation might have transformed DMSO2 into dimethyl sulfate DMSO4, a highly toxic compound capable of damaging the eyes, lungs, and nervous system. If dimethyl sulfate vapors had been released into the air, they could explain the mass illness among the ER staff. They even suggested that the cooling of the drawn blood from body temperature to the cooler ER environment might have accelerated the chemical conversion. However, many chemists criticized the theory. They argued that such a chemical transformation inside the human body under those conditions was highly unlikely and would require more time and heat than were present. Still, the Livermore hypothesis remained the most detailed scientific explanation offered, and it was eventually endorsed by the Riverside Coroner's Office as the probable cause. Despite this, the medical community remained divided, and the case became one of the most heavily investigated medical mysteries in U.S. history. 10 weeks after her death, Gloria Ramirez's body was finally released to her family. They arranged an independent autopsy and a burial at Olivewood Memorial Park in Riverside on April 20th, 1994. Her official cause of death was listed as cardiac dysrhythmia, brought on by kidney failure, stemming from her cervical cancer. But her family continued to insist that something in the hospital, whether chemical exposure, negligence, or both, had played a role in her death. In the years since, the toxic lady case has entered forensic science textbooks and popular culture. It has been featured in investigative television programs like The New Detectives, discussed in medical lectures, and dramatized in shows such as Grey's Anatomy and Murdoch Mysteries. Even Japanese animation was inspired by her case. The 1995 film anthology Memories included a short titled Stink Bomb, in which a man becomes a walking chemical weapon. More than 2 decades later, no theory has been able to fully satisfy both the medical and scientific communities. The Livermore hypothesis stands as the most scientific explanation to date. But the unusual mix of symptoms, the gender-specific patterns, and the sheer scale of the event keep the door open for debate. Was it an incredibly rare and tragic chain of chemical reactions? Or was it a psychological phenomenon compounded by fear and suggestion? For the medical staff who were there that night, the mystery is personal. Many still recall the strange, oily sheen on Ramirez's skin, the pungent, ammonia-like smell, and the surreal chain of fainting and illness that followed. For Gloria's family, the night represents a loss they feel could have been avoided. And for the public, the story endures because it blends science, mystery, and tragedy in a way few real-life cases ever do. To this day, the death of Gloria Ramirez remains a haunting puzzle, a case where the answers may never be fully known. Her final hours transformed an ordinary hospital shift into a scene of chaos and fear, leaving behind a question that still lingers in the air. What really happened to the toxic lady of Riverside? Gloria Ramirez was laid to rest in April 1994, but the mystery of her final hours still lingers. The Livermore Laboratories chemical theory remains the most widely accepted explanation, yet many believe the truth is more complicated, or more sinister. Some see the event as a freak chain reaction of chemicals inside the human body. Others believe it was a mass psychological episode, triggered by fear and stress. And there are those who suspect something happened in that hospital that will never be revealed. For the staff who were there that night, the memory is seared into their minds. The smell, the shimmering skin, the sudden collapse of their colleagues. For Gloria's family, it is an open wound, a story they believe ended in preventable tragedy. Nearly 3 decades later, the toxic lady remains an unsolved enigma, a reminder that even in a place built to heal, danger can arrive in forms no one expects, and that sometimes the deadliest thing in the room is the one you're trying to save.